Hello world, it's been ages since I'm making a video and it's tipping down with rain outside and I don't want to go out to play, so here I am making a video for you today. And what I've got to look at today, this is the single LP version of the new 50th anniversary remix of Abbey Road. Okay, Giles Martin has been making his way through some of the later Beatles albums from '67's Sergeant Pepper up to and including Abbey Road, and I presume they'll do Let It Be next year. Seems strange that they missed out Magical Mystery Tour, not quite sure why. If this video seems slightly underwhelming for a YouTube comeback, it's probably because I think really this remix is slightly underwhelming. It's very nicely done, and yes, you do hear some slightly sort of different bits of the mixes because of the way that they've repanned a lot of the instruments so that they're not in the same places on the stereo spectrum anymore. And so certain bits do come out, and I'll try and highlight a few of those as we go along. I fail to see really what the fuss is about, to be honest, and I haven't watched any of the first impressions of this remix before I'm making this video, so the opinions that I'm expressing are entirely my own. I saw in HMV, because I got this from HMV, I saw the box set of the original album plus the Abbey Road demos that they included. That's 75 quid. I absolutely cannot justify 75 quid on vinyl at the moment. I can barely justify the money that this album cost me, but it was my birthday last week, so I bought it anyway as a present for myself. Yeah, I mean, if you want to hear the demos, then go on to Apple Music. Other streaming services are available and listen to them there. They're all there and you don't have to pay anything for them. The only thing that you're missing out on with the box set, really, in my opinion, is the extra pictures and documentation and the slightly sort of upgraded presentation of that set. And really, you're not missing out, really. So stream it if you have to, especially if you've got a decent hi-fi like me to stream it into. Right, so yeah, I mean, this album is my favourite Beatles album, has to be said. It's hands down number one, okay? I have got several versions of it already. I've got one with a bit missing out of the cover and is in terribly battered condition, but it's an early 70s pressing of it. I've got another one, a French copy, the Pathé Marconi, which is in better condition. For some reason though, the pressing of the Pathé Marconi one, the beginning of Come Together isn't quite right. It kind of fades up instead of sort of coming in at full pelt, which is a bit weird really. At least my copy does. I don't know whether that was the same for every single Pathé Marconi one, but it's in reasonably good condition and I play it from time to time. My go-to edition now is the 2009 stereo remaster, just because they were done so well, and much better than the 80s CD version of it that I've also got. And now I have this one, and there's absolutely no difference in the cover at all or whatever. And I suspect that if you were to be playing one or the other of the 2009 or this latest 2019 mix, I think that you would just be fooled into not really knowing which one was which until you get to some telltale signs, okay? So without any further ado, I'm just going to go through all of the songs and tell you whether or not I can hear much of a difference and what the differences are. So, Come Together. Now, in the blurb on Spotify, not Spotify, I just said the S word, on Apple Music, in the blurb, they mentioned Come Together because they said that the first thing that they do when they do these new remixes is to pan the drums into the centre. and that didn't really work with Come Together. And of course it doesn't, because what actually happened in the studio was that John had a huge amount of reverb on his voice, and when he clapped into the microphone, it kind of made a really sort of resonant sort of thing, which delayed so that you got a few claps, as it were. So it was like that. And that ties in with Ringo's toms, which, because George Martin only ever recorded Ringo in mono, apart from the end on here where he's got a stereo drum solo. That's the only time in the whole Beatles career that his drum kit was ever recorded in stereo. And so with Come Together, the claps and the drums were kind of placed on the soundstage to get it so that it sounded a bit like that there was some panning going on of the drum kit, when in fact actually there wasn't. They kind of coincide with the toms, okay? And so if you're going to try and change that, it's not going to work. It's going to sound really weird. Giles Martin tried to make a kind of fake stereo style recording of Ringo's drum kit, or remixing of Ringo's drum kit. I don't actually think it works as well. It just makes the ambience slightly different. And I think that George Martin in 1969 got that interplay between the clapping and Ringo's drum kit absolutely spot on, and it didn't need changing. But never mind. John Lennon, his kind of orgasmic sounds towards the end are far more pronounced on the new mix, probably because, as I say, they kind of overemphasize the vocals a little bit more on this mix. And also there's also a tiny bit of what sounds to me like that kind of synthesizer sound that they use in the instrumental bit towards the end, and that's a little bit sort of on its Todd a little bit. Paul McCartney's bass is more incisive on the new mix, and also what else was I going to say? You can hear there are some sort of, it's either errant guitar strings, or it's someone screaming or speaking, or being caught on one of the intercom studio mics. In fact, probably it's a bit of both. There are some sort of errant bits that got on there from the control room and what have you, and you can hear them in the original mix, but they're a little bit more obvious here. Something I can't really tell much difference. The only thing I can hear is that during George's solo guitar bit, there's some rhythm guitar coming in, probably played by John, but might not have been. Some rhythm guitar comes in halfway through, and it sounds slightly abrupt the way it comes in. But that's about the only thing I can hear on there that would tell me that is anything different from the original. And Blink and You'll Miss It. Maxwell Silverhammer, again, don't really see much difference going on there. And actually, to be honest, Paul, I think you could have put a different song on there rather than Maxwell Silverhammer. It is a bit crap. Oh Darling, the vocals here, it's the backing vocals that really shine in the new mix. But other than that, again, not a huge amount going on there that would ever tell you that the mix was any different. It does sound really good though, has to be said. It does sound really good. Octopus's Garden, similar. There's some funny sort of low-level noises going on there that come out in the new mix, but again, that's about it. I Want You, She's So Heavy. It's just a superb track anyway, and I just think that, again, there's not much different going on there. Slightly more balanced so that John's vocals come out a little bit more, and that the instruments are slightly sort of recessed into the background. But I think that's a trait of the whole LP, really. I think it really has majored on the vocal performances of the band, and they come to the fore, and the instruments tend to shift back a little bit. It's very minor, you know. All of this stuff is blink and you'll miss it. Okay, Here Comes the Sun. They, or Giles Martin, said that they mixed it so that, again, you could hear how good the backing vocals were. But I also think that here, it might be my imagination, but George's lead guitar, that sort of lead guitar hook, as it were, that we've got dee 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 dee, all of that bit there, that all sounds a bit more sitar-ish than the original did. And the synth positions here, because yes, they did use synthesizers on this album. I think Abbey Road had a huge, very outmoded one that will be outmoded today in the studio, and the Beatles were a bit curious. So yes, there are synthesizers peppered on this album. You know, try Maxwell Silverhammer, for example, has got some synthesizers on it. Here Comes the Sun has got some synthesizers on it, and they are slightly balanced differently, so that particularly at the end of the little instrumental break, da 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 dum dum, that little bit there sounds slightly different, a little bit higher. When I say a little bit higher, more trebly. And there's one of the synths that was layered in the background actually comes slightly more to the fore. That's about it, really, because don't really hear much difference on it. Same with You Never Give Me Your Money. You know, especially if you're not sitting in the stereo hot seat, if you're just wandering around, pottering around, washing up and doing the ironing and whatever, you actually won't hear much difference, to be honest. Sun King, I loved the original Sun King. That sort of groovy thing going on at the beginning is fantastic. There's you know, again, the only difference here is that there's an organ which is being played right to the fore of this, which in the past was mixed into the background. You know, similar with really the rest of the album, to be honest. All of this medley here, from like Mean Mr. Mustard all the way down to Carry That Weight, I don't really hear huge differences at all. The end, yes, that is done slightly differently. I mentioned earlier on that Ringo's drums were originally, in 1969, the only drums that Ringo had been recorded on where he was recorded in stereo. And that is kept there, but for some reason or other, the interplay between the following guitar section, where John, Paul and George are dueling it out for their very lives, basically, because this particular song is basically showcasing the talents of all four Beatles. It's a bit like when you go to a live gig and they introduce all the members of the band, and each member of the band gets a tiny little bit of a solo, like a bass guitar solo or something like that, and this is kind of what they were doing here. So Ringo gets his own bit, and then the other three get their own little guitar solo-y bits. And on the original, apparently that bit was done in mono. This is according to Giles Martin and according to the blurb on Apple Music. And they've separated that out now so that it's in stereo. And yes, it does sound good. It does sound brilliant. And maybe me, when I've got a bit of extra time and, you know, the inclination, I suppose, really to do it, I could sit there and analyse exactly who was playing what. But, you know, there are very sort of pronounced differences in their guitar styles, particularly between John and George. John was, you know, quite an aggressive guitar player. You know, he for the majority of the Beatles' career, he was their rhythm guitarist, and so and he has this amazing innate sense of rhythm, which you know, the other members of the band had to struggle to keep up with. I mean, you know, think of a song like "Happiness Is a Warm Gun," for example, where, you know, in parts, you know, Ringo is playing in sort of 4/4 time, while the rest of them are playing in 6/8. You know, over the "When I Hold You in Your Arms" bit. And you know, so he had this amazing sense of rhythm, which in the end, you know, really comes to the fore and is actually quite aggressive. So you listen to those sort of, you know, hard hitting guitar strums there, and that's John. Okay, whereas Paul and George, I think, you know, they were different, but far more melodic between the pair of them. So it is harder to pick out the differences between their styles. You know, and obviously, you know, towards the end, Her Majesty is basically, you know, the same as, really. You know, I don't really see any difference there. Okay, as I say, the demos are interesting, but they're probably something that you'll only listen to once or twice. And so, you know, don't go overboard and buy, you know, the full whack copy of this. Listen to the demos on Apple Music or Spotify. But yeah, it's a good mix. It's a good mix. If you had to buy one because you didn't have an Abbey Road, I would always recommend the 2009 one, because I'm a bit of a purist. There seems to be, you know, still, even with these remixes, the mentality that they don't really change too much. You know, we all know these albums. They've been round for like 50 odd years, and I think, you know, if they were going to remix them at all, then do something radically different. It's a bit like a cover version of a song, you know. There would be no point in me covering, you know, "Oh Darling" or something like that and making it sound exactly like the Beatles version. It just, you know, there'd be no point in me doing it. It's either got to be so different that it's definitely a cover version, or don't do it at all, you know. And I think, you know, it would be nice to see, you know, some more things like when they did the Love album, for example, you know, which was a total remix, and nobody kicked their toys out of the pram and wet themselves over it. They just thought, that's really interesting, that's really good, you know. And I think that Giles Martin and whatever could have allowed themselves a little bit more license to deviate a little bit more from the mix than they did. You know, for Sergeant Pepper, for example, the Sergeant Pepper new mix is so radically different from the original. You can tell it straight away. But this is essentially not. Get the 2009 if you need an Abbey Road. If you want an interesting aside and you've got the other mix, then get this by all means. But I wouldn't shell out for the demos and stuff like that, you know. Okay, all right, I will see you later in another video. Hopefully I won't leave it as long this time. I even had a comment that said RIP Mark P Muzz, probably because they were sort of prodding me to make some more videos, and so here I am making one just for you. Love you all. See you later. Bye.